Pannavamsa, everyone. Before the start of today's Dhamma talk, sponsored by Mr. and Mrs. Yapa, with the intention of sharing the Dhamma, offering the gift of Dhamma to people who are interested and willing to learn more, and also using this as an opportunity to transfer blessings to all people all across the world who are in the middle of adversity, going through adversity in their life, and hopes that such sharing of Dhamma can be a blessing to all those beings. And for these blessings to be a light at the end of the tunnel for these beings to transgress these states of pain and suffering. So, let us, before the start of the session, chant Namo Tassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Let us spend a few minutes before the talk to bring ourselves into this present moment with a bit of meditation as we sit comfortably, taking a deep breath in, settling into the present, putting aside and away thought of anything beyond the Dhamma and contemplation of the Dhamma. Taking a deep breath in, breathing out, relaxing mind and body. Let us guide our attention to this present moment, here and now. Gently, gently. Relaxing all the muscles all across the body. As we direct our attention and focus to a state of presence and awareness, to where we are, the sensations all across the body. As we breathe in and out, relaxing deeper and deeper. Establishing a state of wakeful awareness with this present moment. Embracing the tranquility and bliss of simply being present in the now. Gently. Taking a deep breath in again. Breathing out. Relax. Let us welcome the teachings of the Buddha. Good in the beginning, middle, and the end. Harmful to only the kilesas and the defilements. Harmless to the practitioner and all else. Let us share in the wholesome vibration of the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha, of the Kusala mind rooted in non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion, liberating, transcendent. As you take a deep breath in, breathing out, relaxing. And when we are ready, gently opening our eyes and awakening to the present. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So for today's topic, we have selected the topic of the nature of the Buddha, and then Mara. The story of Mara from beginning to end. In every aspect of the Dhamma, when we hear the term Mara, Mara has always depicted a nature of trouble, of anguish, of creating or being a hurdle to the practice. The practice being, of course, that which is rooted in non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion. The practice that includes the abandonment of those factors that are defiling to the mind, that defiles the mind. Mara, even in the sense of a god or Devaputra Mara, has always been seen as a foe, as a troublemaker, as someone who disrupts the path and practice of the bodhisattvas, of the arahants, of the Pacceka Buddhas, and the Buddha himself. Mara goes against every aspect of what the Buddha taught. When we look at the depictions of how the stories of Mara and the reasons why he becomes motivated to go against the Sangha, to go against the Buddha, we find that Mara, in his being and in the position that he holds as Yama, right, is rather unable to accept the fact of beings going beyond him. Mara cannot accept the fact of beings becoming far more karmically resilient in a way that a person cultivates a sense of great and profound weighty karma that would allow that being to transcend the position of Mara. I think that too, that aspect of Mara too teaches us a lot, isn't it? The inability to see that others might do better than oneself is always what Mara, or what has infuriated Mara and caused him to be such a disruption to Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, to Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha. We know Mara is most powerful not alone, but when surrounded by his retinue, his henchmen, right? His henchmen, when he's surrounded, when he has a support of all of his armies. And this is an important part to remember, everyone. So keep that in mind. When Mara is supported by his armies, he's most powerful. He's most powerful. Without which, Mara is yet powerful. He's a Devaputra, but not so much. Right? Not so much. Just like, I guess, just like any general, isn't it? Right? When you have a strong force behind you, you feel far more superior and able to defeat your enemies. So today's topic was selected not just to tell you the story of Mara, but to speak on the insidious ways that Mara exercises his power over us, humans, who are beings of a Trihetuka Patisandhi, which means that we have the ability of attaining nirvana. However, these forces of Mara finds a way into our thought, into our way of life, into our proceedings day to day, in a way that our practice, our yonso mansikara, and all else to do with the progression of Dhamma is now hindered. When we look at the practice, the Buddha, and what the Buddha taught, we find the Buddha speaks on 4 types of Mara. Right? This is something that is known to most. Machu Mara, right? Death as Mara. Klesha Mara, Skanda Mara, and Devaputra Mara. We could understand death, Klesha, and Skanda, the aggregates, the 5 aggregates, Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana, as being fellow supporters or the henchmen of Mara, in a way. Right? Now, when we look at death is something that we all at one point come to experience. It is a cutting off of life, where then we continue along with the kusalas or the akusalas that arise in mind at the time of death, at the time or through the process of the death, the death process, chutti chitta viti, right? Which determines where we would arise and what kind of life we would lead to a great extent. This is not to say that death and the Patisandhi process determines everything, but it does have a very powerful say in the life that we would lead. For example, if we are born in positions that we are unable to pursue the Dhamma, in positions of great difficulty and challenge, in positions where we go through from the time of birth up until the time of death, if we are to go through or put through immense amounts of suffering, within such births, it becomes very difficult or even impossible to have any sort of Dhammic contemplation. For an example, when a being is born into the low or the more intense hells, it is said that from the time of arising within these states after death, up until the time of passing away from these positions or realms, one does not experience any other mind other than pain. Just imagine, everyone, if we were to burn ourselves from a candle or a stove fire or whatnot, right? That acute pain that we feel. And imagine a world, a life, where from conception to death, or rather birth to death, we would experience that intense fire burning, not just at the tips of our fingers or hands, but all across the body, burning in a furnace, an inferno of fire from beginning to end. That is Niraya, Avichi. When we reduce or when we go to the weaker hells, we have the ice cold hells, where now it is not fire, but it is ice. We freeze from birth to death. When we go higher on the 32 planes of existence to weaker, right? We go higher we started from Avicii, we are going higher, right? When we go higher, we find being pretas or yakas or pisachas, all in those positions, we become obsessed with whatever sense pleasures we are addicted to at that time. We have no interjection which allows a Dhammic contemplation. Have no interjection which allows a Dhammic contemplation. We know, everyone, freedom in life is something that we all seek. Freedom from suffering, freedom from pain, freedom from many different aspects that we would consider unwholesome experiences in life. Whilst we sort out freedom, not everyone gets it. Freedom is a very expensive and rare commodity. Not everyone can have freedom. Freedom is something which requires work and dedication, right? Being born into positions where you can cultivate freedom is a rarity. That is why the Patisandhi is worth something. This Patisandhi, we can speak in regards to Machumara. With regards to Machumara. Machumara is the Mara of death. The Mara of death is portrayed as if Yama himself is death. When we are mature in years, or we become mature in years, and when we find ourselves, let us say, now in that era or in that decade where we are now committed to the spiritual practice, ardently committed, strongly committed, we find great interest in the spiritual path. Now, what hinders that? Death hinders that, right? Death hinders that. As we start understanding and making progress, death can arise at any moment. Death can arise at any moment. Hence, death becomes something that hinders progress. As we mature, as we grow wise, as we go through experiences that are not so pleasant, right? And then use those experiences to cultivate our wisdom, to grow more aware of the Dhamma, realize that compared to our younger years, we are now happier with the Dhamma, come into terms with what reality is and grow true inspiration in seeing what the Dhamma is saying and grow a sense of disillusionment towards the sense pleasures, to realize, yes, these pleasures will be there, but these are not the most important things in our life. When we come into that realization in our mature years, and we start committing ourselves to the practice, some might find themselves being visited by the Mara of death. Death can come to one and acts as a Mara because it hinders progress upon what we know and learned. What we know and learned. So it is important that we grow a sense of Dhammic awareness, right? Dhammic awareness towards this experience. When we are mindful of these measures of Dhamma, right? Because of death, we experience the Patisandhi process. Before the Patisandhi process, this process of rebirth, we have different, in Pali we use the word nimittas, which arise before death, or signaling that death might be coming soon. These nimittas are very subtle to most. What these nimittas do is they show visuals, colors, arise, corresponding to the karmas, the karmic habits that we have cultivated over our past life, right? It might be different colors, it can be visuals, these things arise. Now, everyone, if we think about things that arise, or visuals that would arise all of a sudden out of the blue, surprising us, taking us by surprise, what would usually happen to a person who is unaware of these proceedings or things that would happen? It would obviously take the person by surprise, isn't it? You can get quite restless with it. I'm seeing this, I'm seeing that, I'm having this dream, I'm having that dream. It can take a person by surprise. Now, what does surprise here indicate? Restlessness, uddacha. Restlessness arises. Now, restlessness, uddacha, is what? It is a hindrance, isn't it? It is a hindrance. When restlessness arises, what happens is we cannot take a proper, stable object. What we can take or further fuel in the process is further uddacha. Do you understand? Right? Meaning, kusala by nature is solid, stable, clear, whilst its foe, akusala, is not solid, right? There is no solidity in it. It works by creating obstruction. It works by defiling the mind. It is the foe of clarity. It is not too clear, but we find ourselves bouncing from one thing to another, when it comes to the hindrances, right? So when we are not able to face Machumara, the Mara of death, Yama as death itself, right? When we are unable to be mindful of these Dhammic measures that come into visual, into being experienced, what happens? Then, when we are not mindful, we cannot put Dhamma into practice. When we are not mindful, the things that we experience, the things that we see, we are unable to put Dhamma into practice. Let us take the example of Sariputta's relative, where in the Pretavastu it speaks about how this dana was done with flowers and the sangha, and how after death, right, after death, the person was reborn in the high heavens. However, the person karmically was not going to be reborn in the high heavens. They were supposed to be reborn in the hellish realms. However, because of the sights of flowers and all of these things, the person had enough sensing mind to be able to realize the beauty of what was happening around them. Now, this is where everyone, Ayodhya Mansikara can come to bite you in your back. Right? We cultivate Ayodhya Mansikara, right? Wrong attention. We are critical. We blame. We do all of these things. We are very cynical and all of these things that we forget to realize, to experience, to live out the beauty of things that are happening. Now a person is doing something nice for you. Because of Ayodhya Mansikara, you are unable to enjoy it. Now, if that relative where the Sangha got together and did the dana, did the Puppa Puja, the Mal Puja and all of that, if the relative was unable to rejoice in the beauty that was around, what would have happened? The Dhammic measure, the Dhammic Mansikara would have not arisen. Does that make sense, everyone? Right? This is not to say that we should be sort of, forcing ourselves to believe or forcing ourselves into Dhammic measure. No. Enjoy. If it is beautiful, it is beautiful. And I'm going to speak about that aspect of from anicca in a bit, right? To be able to enjoy and rejoice upon the beauty that is, whether it is a kusala mind or a kusala intention, to be able to rejoice in it. That allows a person to put Dhamma into practice. Dhamma in practice is manifested through right attention. Without right attention, are we ever able to put Dhamma into practice with wrong attention? No, because wrong attention sprouts and buds through what? Akusala, unwholesome. Unwholesome. When we are able to be mindful over these nimittas that arise, right? Now we are still talking about Machumara. Then, if we are unable to, we will not be able to put the Dhamma into practice. If we are unable to put the Dhamma into practice, what is the Dhamma? The Dhamma is right attention. The Dhamma is the understanding of the Four Noble Truths. The Dhamma is the Eightfold Noble Path. The Dhamma is the dependent origination. If we are to go deeper, the Dhamma is the Patthana, cause and effect. These things, you see, if we are unable to understand the Dhamma and put Dhamma into practice during that last time, right, the process of death will not be so pure. Why? Because restlessness as a hindrance would arise, right? Kama chanda can arise. Aversion can arise towards the process of death itself, towards the fact that we might be leaving all of this behind very soon itself, right? Aversion might arise to the fact that we've got to leave so early and we are unable, or we have been unable to finish what we have to finish, right? My son is not yet married, my daughter is not yet married, I have not seen my grandchildren as yet, right? All of these things come to mind, right? This is what? Friction with death itself. Now, what are these, everyone? There can be karma chanda in these. I've not yet been able to be a grandfather. I'm not yet able to be I've not seen my grandchildren grow up as yet. All of these is karma chanda can arise. Vyapada can arise. Hatred towards the process of death itself. Kama chanda, vyapada, thina midda, uddhacha kukkucha, vichikicha, doubt. Where am I going to go after this? What will happen to me? Do you understand? Is that clear, everyone? Right? These hindrances, regardless of what position it is in life that we are in, right? Regardless, even if you have grandchildren or not, or your children are married or not, the hindrances will find it's not about the children. It is not about the grandchildren. It is not about things that you have been unable to complete. It is about the hindrances manifesting in different ways. Do you understand? It is about the hindrances. The hindrances will find something. That is the way the hindrances are. The hindrances can very easily turn something which is beautiful and pleasant into something which seems very ugly and unpleasant as well. That is the power the hindrances exercise, everyone. Right? That is the power the hindrances exercise. So what would happen? When Ayodhya Manasakara is not there, Dhamma practice is not possible. When Dhamma practice is not possible, the Patisandhi process and the death process will not be so pure. So what will happen when the Patisandhi and the death process is not so pure? The determination that we have, if let us say you lived in a way that you did good. Right? However, when the hindrances arose, it takes the object of, I want to do another kathina. Do you understand? I want to do another kathina before I passed. I want to do this and that before. So what happens? Now the pinkamas and all that was good was done to attain nirvana. Right? Now we are in the process of death. The hindrances, what they do is we forget about nirvana and we take the kama vachara kusala as object. Now I want to do more of this, so why do I have to go right now? Do you understand? Our determination goes off course. Do you understand? Our determination, api When we did the pinkama, when we did the wholesome deed, we did the wholesome deed with a sense of determination to attain nirvana. Now we've forgotten about nirvana because restlessness, doubt, hatred, karma, chana, these things have arisen. So now we forget about nirvana and take the karma vachara, the thing that we have to let go as object. But we will have to let go of it because you have no choice in the matter. Hence, because of this, because the determination is not strong enough, because it is being obstructed, what will happen is our way of approaching the process is destructive and it will take us away from positions. The hindrance becomes powerful. Hindrance becomes powerful because the death process weakens the mind. The hindrance becomes powerful. And at the time of death itself, regret or any one of the hindrances can come to the mind. That is why Dhammic contemplation and Dhammic practice is important. But it is not necessary that we all practice a Dhamma because of death, right? That we all practice a Dhamma because of death. However, most of the reasons that encapsulates the effort that the reason for the effort put in to contemplate on the Dhamma is based upon the 8 worldly Dhammas, right? Isn't it? When we go through praise and then go through criticism, when we hear good news and then hear bad news, when we have gain and then we lose, when things are going well and when things are going poorly in terms of health and all of that, right? The 8 worldly Dhammas. Because of these ups and downs of life, we come into Dhamma. We come into Dhamma. We try to understand the Dhamma to such an extent where it can help us in coming into terms with these utter low Dhamma. Right? Utter low Dhamma. This utter low Dhamma, through the practice, we try to look at utter low Dhamma or to perceive these experiences of life that a person will for sure go through within the course of life through equanimity, upekshaven. උපේක්ෂාවෙන් අපි අටලෝ දහම දිහා බලලා මේ අටලෝ දහම දෙක ජීවත් වෙන්න අපි උත්සාහවත් වෙනවා. ඒ උත්සාහවත් වීමට අපි ධර්මයේ ප්‍රායෝගිකව පාවිච්චි කරනවා. We use the Dhamma, we try to apply the Dhamma practically towards how do I look at these things with equanimity? How do I look at these things with equanimity? Right? That brings us to the fact of how do we now have the power of Dhamma within us and go about abiding by the Dhamma, where we are able to now create this power of practice of equanimity towards these 8 transitory things that we go through in life. It is said, as we look at the Dhamma, as we learn the Dhamma, as we arouse a sense of Shraddha towards the Dhamma, the trust that arises towards the Dhamma, there are 4 parts of that trust. Then another. When we look at the Dhamma must be practically applicable. No? This applicability comes with trust. It cannot be separated. If there is no trust, it's not applicable. That is when we hear people say, oh, but you can't really adhere to the Dhamma in this context or that context. No. It's about that sense of trust that you have that Dhamma can be used in this context too, right? The conviction that we have towards practice. The first of that, everyone, is the innermost outlook of life and the willingness to accept with trust that Dhamma has a way in this discourse. Does that make sense? The outlook, Yoniso Mansikara, and the acceptance that Dhamma will have a way to look at this, or a way by which we can pick this apart through Dhamma. What happens when we say, no, we can't apply Dhamma to this? We cut down the ability of applying Yoniso Mansikara into that part. Is that clear? When we say that, first off, no, this, we cannot live life, just like monks or nuns. We have children, we have this going on, that going on. You can have so many things going on, but does not mean අකාලික කියන මේ ධර්මයේ මේ මොහොතේ අවලංගුයි කියන කතාව අපිට කියන්න බෑ. Is that clear, everyone? We cannot say that the Dhamma does not apply to this part. Because why? All of which we are going through is Nama and Rupa. This Nama and Rupa is made out of Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vinyana. All of the attachments and clinging that we have, the frustrations that we have, is either lobha, dosa, moha. Right? Everything that fuels us in terms of our spiritual applications comes from prajna, sila, shraddha. You see, all of these components are within the Dhamma. So if the mundane experience of life that you're going through falls into any one or more of these parts, how can we say that the Dhamma cannot be applied? The Dhamma cannot be applied through mind, Yoniso Mansikara, when this happens. What is this? The attraction, the clinging to sensual pleasures is greater than the Shraddha that we experience. That is when we cannot find a way through the Dhamma. This is this first part. The ability to accept that Dhammic measures can be applied, that total trust, that Dhammic measures can be applied to anything that we see in life. Is that clear, everyone? This can be easier to accept for those of you who have retired, who are fully committed to the Dhamma. But in true form, this is most important to people who are holding current positions right here, right now. Right here, right now. Who are working, who are struggling with work, who are going through these phases of the 8 vicissitudes of life in such a great scale. Then we have, I'm going to say this in Sinhala and then translate, right? Dharma pratipadawa mona akarikin hari mama pratipada mama පිළිබලින්න උත්සාහවත් වෙනවා. I am going to try my level best. I am going to do everything within my power to handle this through Dhamma, the trust that goes into action. Do you understand, everyone? First, it was the trust that goes into the outlook of life. The second is the trust that goes into action. Is that clear? Right? First is thought, second is action. Even if I am to become a beggar, it says, which is quite an intense example, right? But whatever it takes, I am going to try to adhere. I am going to do my level best to adhere with the Dhamma, to apply and move forward with the Dhamma. This is, everyone, even in meditation, when we face the difficult, more intense stages of pain and suffering during meditation practice, this is a mentality that helps most monks and ardent practitioners, right? Monava vunat, I'm going to continue. Do you understand? Is that clear, everyone? Right? The third is the willingness to accept the results of applying the Dhamma. The third is the willingness to accept, right, the results of applying the Dhamma, which is this. When our roots, our beginnings of whatever action is not so pure, now applying the Dhamma midway through that whole process, at one point you have now come to realize a certain part of Dhamma, and you are now willing to take responsibility. Taking responsibility comes with some sort of consequence, no? Especially when you've done something wrong, isn't it? The ability to take responsibility, the willingness to accept the results of that Dhammic practice. Is that clear, everyone? Boruwa kiwa nang e boruwa harigassanna ona. E boruwa harigassanne dharme hindane. Dharmයට තියෙන ශ්‍රද්ධාව හින්දානේ. ඒ හේතුවෙන් දැන් බොරුව මම බොරුවක් කිව්වේ කියලා අපි ආපහු මේ මිනිස්සයාට කියනොට යම්කිසි විදියට මේ මිනිස්සයා අපි දිහා යම්කිසි අමුතුවෙන් බලන්න පුළුවන්. ඒ බැලුවත් මම ධර්මයෙන් කටයුතු කරනවා කියන තියෙන ශ්‍රද්ධාව. Do you understand? Is that clear, everyone? For me, this makes great sense, this piece of these 4 sections, because this is actually, as monks, this is exactly what we go through, right? This is exactly what we go through in the Vinaya. When we break a rule, we must confess. That confession is done through the utmost acceptance of its consequences. Certain rules, when they are broken, we have to undergo penance. We have to undergo a time of being treated like an outcast almost. And that is something to be accepted. That is what gives it gravity itself, the practice gravity, right? The willingness to accept. ඒ කියන්නේ ධර්මය කියන්නේ බොරුවක් නෙමෙයිනේ. ධර්මය කියන්නේ ඇත්ත. මේ ලෝක ධර්මයන්, මේ සියලු ලෝක ධර්මයන්ට අඩංගු වෙන හෝ අදාළ වෙන ඇත්ත. This will not be taken far from you, or will not take, if you're trying to lead a Dhammic path through a lie, it's not going to take you far. The willingness to accept that responsibility is that third type of faith. Do you understand? Is that clear, everyone? We will have time for question and answers as well at the end. If you do have any, so if you do have something, write it down. Make sure that even if you are to put it on the chat section, that is quite okay, right? The fourth is, when it comes to the Dhammic practice, right? When it comes to the Dhammic practice, when you have led a life that is quite far from the Dhamma, when your community or the community around you, friends that are around you, are not friends that you've gained through Dhamma, but friends that you've gained through other mediums of thought, other ways of life, right? What would happen? When you now start practicing the Dhamma, you will lose friends. Do you understand? Because these friends might not be friends who completely agree with your new way of life, which is a Dhammic way of life. What happens then? You might lose people. It goes on to say, the ability to commit to the results of the Dhamma or the change in Dhamma, even if you were to die friendless or alone in a cave. Very strong. Very strong. And we must remind ourselves of the words of the Buddha himself when he says, tread alone if you do not find one equal or find one who is higher in qualities than you, right? But do not engage in a journey with one who is lower, who is considered a fool or a bala, which is the Pali term for it, right? Because that person will eat up at you. This fourth process or the stage of acceptance, of trust, shraddha, is the fact of being able to accept the results, the consequences of the Dhammic practice, even if you were to die friendless and alone. Is that clear, everyone? Right? It is to that. Now, of course, this is speaking to, abandoning your old life, taking responsibility for actions and moving forward. But let me also remind you that when your mental vibration changes, what happens as a result? You will gain Dhammic friends. You will gain people who are now supportive of your energy, of your sacrifices made towards nirvana, people who understand the journey that you are in as well, right? So you're not just losing, you're gaining. But when we are in the middle of it, we just focus on the losing, isn't it? Right? So it says, what the verse goes on to say is like, even if I have to lose all of these people, I will still go ahead with my Dhammic path. And you find this resembled through the Bodhisattva's path of practice, everyone. The Bodhisattva through hurdles as king, as an emperor, as a king, as Sakra, or as all of these people, what did he do? He persevered. He persevered. Even at the loss of life, he persevered. He did not stop himself. And as people who are truly, if we are truly encouraged, and if we have that faith, may Buduhamdru Deshna Karahu, may Dharme Attak Nang, if we are truly going to get that benefit from the Dhamma, why are we unable to let go of what we might have done before or what we are doing now, if we truly believe in what is to be gained through the Dhamma? Do you understand? What this process eliminates is the fact of having one foot in the Kama Loka and one foot in the pathway to Nirvana. You can't do that, no. How can you do that? We are only fooling ourselves. Right? We see this we see this right here within our lives. Right now, we see it. People would do ostentatious, lavish, merit-making ceremonies. But it is clear when we hear them speak about it, they're speaking about it with so much of ego. I did this, I did that. It is all we hear is a sonata of me, and me. Right? It is me again. Now that is where this cuts all of that away, everyone. It completes, it chops it off. The Buddha himself saying, in the path of practice, let go of that to excel in this. Is that clear? Is that clear, everyone? Now, this leads to, right, something which is known as, now you are putting in, this is Shraddha. We spoke about this type of Shraddha here. The Shraddha towards the practice and taking responsibility. In another sense, we have something called the 3 diamond convictions, right? The 3 diamond convictions, which is why it's called diamond, is make a hell in a hand. Do you understand? It doesn't shake. There is no shakiness in this. It's solid. This is it, right? It is a discipline, right? It is a discipline that is unwavering. What is that? To go ahead with the Dhamma practice without any consideration to what others think about you doing so. Do you understand? What others think about you doing so. For example, if you are wearing, if you change your clothes to more simple clothes, you might, if you're so concerned about what people are saying, then you will be motivated to wear now better clothes. Now with better clothes, the need to satisfy other people through better clothes. What is that? Kama Chanda. What is that? The attachment to reputation. What is that? The ego, right? What pursuing being truth to yourself without being so caught up in the opinions of others about your practice. One. Two, the constant commitment to developing awareness, cultivating awareness, always being able to do things and to go ahead in a path where you cultivate awareness. This is the discipline. Just like in the Panchasila, you would say, I will not kill. I'm not going to kill mosquitoes. I'm not going to kill cockroaches. I'm not going to kill spiders. I'm not going to do any of that, right? That's a discipline. That's the Panchasila, the first one. Just so you say to yourself, I am going to work on cultivating awareness. Do you understand? As a discipline. The first one, I'm not going to be caught up in the I'm not going to be considerate of the opinions of others to what they think about my practice. The second is being committed to cultivating the discipline of wakefulness. And three is not getting caught up in the concerns of the world, right? You hear something on the TV with regards to news, right? Or what's going on somewhere. Now, this is what's going on somewhere, and we do not get too caught up. We do not get caught up, not too caught up. We do not get caught up in those concerns. We continue in the path. Do you understand? Right? Some might say this is isolating. Some might say this is selfish. Some might say that we are trying to cultivate a practice that is sort of pushing everything else to a side, right? That we are running away from something as practitioners, right? Yes, we are running away from samsara. Yes, we are running away from the cycle of rebirth and death. Yes, we are running away from the matrix, being caught up in a hamster wheel of suffering, just as we were for so many births. The world at a time comes to arise. During this time, pure beings from the Brahma realm descend and are reborn in the human realm. The human realm is so pure. The lifespan is so long. Then the world goes through chaos, through kilesas, wars raging, all of these things constantly happens. And then at one time, what happens? The universe itself descends into absolute chaos and is destroyed by its own elements. And then after a great time afterwards, again the world arises. This cycle has been going on and on and on and on. None of these things that we are experiencing with health, decay, the values, the weakening of world values, none of these things are new, anyone. None of these things are new. These are all inferences of kilesha showing its true colors through people in every sense of its word. None of this is real. I'm sorry, none of this is new. Right? None of this is new. We as practitioners whose goal becomes nirvana operate in a manner where we do not compromise on our values and virtues just because we might see a weak being doing something so poor in body or speech mannerisms. Do you understand? Just because just because a person chooses vile language to express their emotions, does that mean that we are going to be doing the same? No, we are not going to fall into that level. Why? Because we are disciplined. Disciplined in what? Disciplined in the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha. Does that make sense, everyone? That is how we go from now not being afraid of Machumara. Do you understand? Maranayata baya novi jeevat wena aakare thamai දැන් ඔය කොටස් වලින් කියවුනේ. මරණයට බය නොවි ජීවත් වෙන ආකාරය. Then what happens? Then we come on to the aspects where this fear arises. Where does this fear arise, everyone? The second, Kileshamara. Kileshamara. Kileshamara is, of course, something up until we have enlightenment or experience enlightenment. This is something that we will all experience. Kileshas, hindrances arising through many, many different ways and mechanisms, through the consciousness processes that we conduct ourselves within. It arises with it. It arises with it. Something that we have learned recently through our classes, our Wednesday classes, is about prapancha. And we know that the prapanchas, the proliferating factors of mind, works or puts itself or becomes active at the stage of the anusaya. The anusaya is through which we have the pariyuttana and the vitikama kilesas. So any sort of kilesa that could arise, we have the prapanchas operating within it, right? And these kilesas that arise are all a part of Mara. All a part of Mara. Kileshamara. Kileshamara are these emotions, is when these emotions and attitudes arise. The Mara aspect is, Mara is where we become, we use this, or this aspect that we have just perceived through emotions becomes self. Right? Because Mara has to keep you grounded. That is what Mara does. Grounded within what? Where you are. Keeps you from developing. So what does it do? It seeks to establish permanence in what is not permanent. It seeks to establish self in what has no self. It seeks to establish the concept of pleasure and the permanence of happiness in what does not have any form of permanence. ඒ කියන්නේ අනිත්‍ය දුක්ඛ අනාත්මයි කියන දේ පෙන්වන්නේ නැතුව නිට්ටයයි සුඛයි ආත්මයි කියන මේ සංකල්පයට අපිව වටනවා. We start operating through those concepts. That is what Kilesha Mara does. Kilesha and then Mara. Because that is the only way that Mara can keep us grounded in the same cesspool of kileshas that we have been stuck in through this journey of samsara. Through this journey of samsara. How does that do it? How does that work out, or how does that mechanism go about? It is through thinking or taking of whatever emotions, attitudes, views that arise. We hold these views as real. We hold this view as permanent. We hold these views as sukha. We hold this view with self. That is how Kilesha Mara works. How do we tackle it? Dharma pratipadavata shraddhavin apiyomuna. Do you understand? Right? However, when an emotion arises, everyone, when the emotion is hatred, you are so annoyed with something. You are so annoyed with something. So annoyed that you think it is almost, that you think that it is, that your annoyance, that your hate-rooted chitta is deserving of, can be not deserving. The word would be, is all right, basically. Right? Is all right. We tell ourselves that this person is deserving of our annoyance or frustration. But that is where we are wrong. Now, because of external elements and experiences, emotions and attitudes, which has rubbed us the wrong way, now we are giving up what? Something which is far greater. Maybe the samadhi that we have been cultivating. Maybe the kusala chitta that we have been cultivating. Maybe the kusala habits that we were cultivating. The pursuance of dhamma that we were cultivating. The buddhanusati that we were cultivating. The metta that we were cultivating. All of that we throw away because we think this hatred is deserving. This person is a person who is really causing annoyance. This person is really deserving of this hate. So now what happens? What has happened is, just like we spoke of in the prapancha, the object that was perceived now becomes the whole subject of mind, obsession. Obsession. In that obsession, we forget that we have this whole practice, that we were working for something. In that obsession, we forget this practice and we retreat, or now we refute to the fact of hating, lust, or delusion, the pursuit of our ignoramus views. Does that make sense, everyone? So the way that we fight the Kilesha Mara is, of course, with all of those attributes of discipline that we cultivate. Discipline that we cultivate, not for the sake of anyone else, for our sake. For our sake. And a part of that discipline is the cultivation of awareness, where then we are able to interject. When the kilesas arise, we are able to interject and say, this is a kilesha. Right? When a manusse karna varadakata mam mechchara thavenni ayye. Right? When a manusse eka manusse karapu varadakata ayyi mam me minisu okkumalaටම බයින්නේ. Right? Even we can say this, එක හාමුදුරු කෙනෙක් කරපු දෙයකට ඇයි මම මේ මුළු සංඝ රත්නයටම දැන් මේ දෝෂාරෝපණය කරන්නේ? What happened there, everyone? Right? What happened? The obsession, the object became the subject. The object became the subject. When it becomes subject, the whole mind, the world, your world becomes that object, which is now the subject. Right? That with discipline and now with mindfulness, awareness, vipassana, we are able to interject this process and stop it from going further, which is of absolute importance. What happens? When something of this sort happens, everyone, what happens? Your meditation suffers. Your meditation suffers. So that discipline that we spoke of under Machumara is of great importance. Monade vunat mama dharma pratipadaven dharma pratipadaවට පටහැනිව හිතන්නේ නැහැ, කටයුතු කරන්නේ නැහැ. That discipline, right? That discipline. Then we come, now these kilesas, how do these kilesas operate, everyone? These kilesas operate through Nama and Rupa. Correct? What is Nama and Rupa? The 5 aggregates. Right? Now we come to the fact of Mara as aggregates. Skanda Mara. Skanda Mara. Skanda Mara, we know. What is Skanda Mara? Skanda Mara is the aggregates which are tainted, right? Tainted aggregates. Skandamara is the pursuance of beholding the aggregates through a tainted perspective. Do you understand? Does that make sense? Which is the Pancha Skanda becomes the Pancha Upadana Skanda. Correct? How does it become the Pancha Upadana Skanda, the 5 aggregates of clinging? Because we hold or look at or perceive the 5 aggregates as me, myself, and I. That is how it becomes tainted. Right? That is how an object that is externally perceived becomes a subject of mind, where we now grow to be obsessed. Is that clear, everyone? Now, everyone, if we are to take a moment and tell ourselves, look, okay, we have Bhante here, we have so many other people who call who have, different names and all of these things. And if we tell ourselves, make a mage ekama jeevite neme, this is not the only life that I will have, which is true, isn't it? Upon death, regardless of whatever age we are, death can come to us all. And afterwards, what do we become? Something else. Dependent upon our rebirth process, our karmas, we become something entirely else. Right? Just as the analogy of the it's not Dhanasala, what's the word that they use? Where people come together to do pinkamas, right? And then they go back and we call Akka, Malli, sister, brother, Amma, all of these things, right? For a short period of time. And after that time finishes, we go about and we do not meet again. That is exactly it. This life, if we remind ourselves, everyone, this life is not the only life that we are going to be having. We will have another life, right? We will have another life. So what happens then? We become less obsessed with the fact of thinking that this, working as if this is the last meal that we are going to have. Like a person on death row being given whatever meal that he wants to have, is going to cherish it and eat it, right? Just so we assume, because of this self, we always think, although we might through Dhamma, we know that there is rebirth, but we don't really think of that. We inherently assume that this is me, right? I am experiencing this. And because of that, we consume as if that person on death row being given that last meal, this is not our only life. Just as the great Ajahn Chah says, a disciple is not concerned about these identities of life or death of one life, because for the true disciple, the only concern is what? The life that you begin your practice and the life that you end your sansaric journey. When කිසිම දෙයක් අපිට අදාළ නැහැ. The life that you begin your practice and the time that you end your journey in samsara. And if we remind ourselves and tell ourselves, look, this is not my only life. Maybe a lot of the akusalas that we do, the temptations that we give into, might reduce drastically. Because we know this is not the only thing, right? We have been giving into temptation for as long as time itself. For as long as suffering itself, we have been giving into temptation. We have been doing wrong and good, right? Hence, we have the fact of skandamara, pursuing this view of self within Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara, and Vijnana, everyone, and Vijnana. Skandamara. What do we do here? We cultivate vipassana. To do what? To see that these skandhas have a nature of its own. Mechanisms, just as the mechanisms of photosynthesis. Just like sound travels and light travels, these are mechanisms, nama and rupa, operating. And clinging to such through the scope of me, myself, and I is only delusional, right? Is only delusional. And because of that concept of self, we see self. We can train ourselves to see otherwise. We definitely can. But how do we do it? Through vipassana. Through vipassana. When now death, yonisumanasikara, Kilesamara, Bhavana and Yonisamanasikara. Now the Bhavana turns into Vidarshana, Satipatthana. Now Satipatthana process leads where? Nirvana. That is where then Deva Putramara becomes upset. Because the moment, do you understand? Does that make sense? Now, when Devaputramara senses that you are cultivating jhanas that would take yourself, ourselves, beyond his position, now he becomes very upset. Now he becomes very upset. That is the only time that we have a Devaputra Mara being bothered with us. Usually, we are the people who create enemies in samsara. These enemies can be friends or relatives that we have wronged in the past who come behind us through birth to now disrupt our lives. We are the people through misguided communication, misguided intentions. We create enemies for ourselves in this life. Through the lack of compassion and understanding, we upset so many people. And because of these mistakes that we commit and do, we create communities who are against us, However, just because these forces are against us, the Buddha says, do not ever think that the human mind is so weak that you have to give in to any of these forces. The human mind is a mind that has potential of achieving the highest states of enlightenment, from arahantship to Pacheka Buddhahood to Buddhahood itself. This human mind is far from weak. However, when we are, or when we do give in to the kilesas and we think great of the kilesas, that we think that the kilesas or the hindrances and these emotionals are final, that is when we become truly weak and powerless. In coming into the realization through discipline, through yonsu mansikara, through taking up of faith towards the path, through understanding of the path, and ultimately bring ourselves to practice vipassana, we realize how powerful and strong we are. And that strength transcends life. From one life to another, that strength transcends. That is how practitioners, we have heard, we know, that practitioners who practice in the path and attain nirvana as a sotapanna, from birth up until 7 births, the inclinations of nirvana will remain within the consciousness of the person, although the person will not be able to remember past births. The inclinations of nirvana will remain. Why? Because that wholesome mind, that supramundane mind is very powerful, everyone. Is very powerful. And it was people, it was people like us drowning in this cesspit of kileshas and hindrances that came to right mind and now work to liberate themselves from this samsaric journey as Buddhas, Pacheka Buddhas, and Arhants. Do not think yourself weak. You are not. If the Buddha says anything through his Dhamma, it is of how we break apart these foundations that we have assumed permanent and build a foundation where we can now practice and continue to practice our Dhamma. This is of utmost importance. Because the more that we give into kileshas, the more that we give into dittis and wrong view and all of these things, the more that we give into the fact of assuming permanence in this world, the more suffering we will be preparing ourselves for. The more suffering we will have to face. And some, even when the Dhamma is right at your doorstep or right on your lap, just like people like Devadatta, right? Being born as a cousin of the Buddha himself, then having to go through doing all of that where he ended up in the hellish realms, right? What is that? Misguidedness, everyone. Misguidedness. So let this talk offer inspiration. These are the ways that Mara works. These are the armies and the retinues of Mara. Out of 4 types of Mara, 3 of them exist right within here. Isn't it? Only 1 is in the divine plane. The rest exists right within here, everyone. Hence, let us not be so obsessed with trying to cure the outside world. Through our practice, let us try to cure the viruses and illnesses that we have within here. In this mind and body, not giving rise to kilesha, but being committed through discipline, being committed to the fact of making progress each and every day. Making progress each and every day. And I hope that this Dhamma talk and Dhamma sharing inspires you in one way or the other to commit to the daily practice of Vipassana, to understanding, maybe not even the daily practice, maybe just Yoniso Manasikara. මං අනිත් මිනිසුන්ගේ කිලුටු මගේ ජීවිතයට ගාව ගන්නේ නැහැ. කියන මේ අදහස විතරක් අපි යෝනිසු මනසිකාරයෙන් අපි මේක ප්‍රතිබද්ධාවක් වශයෙන් අපි මේක අපේ ජීවිතය තුළ ඇති කරගන්න උත්සාහවත් වුණොත්, that itself would take us a long way. Hence, this Dhamma talk was arranged in order to share Dhamma, to create the opportunity of contemplating Dhamma, creating a sense of Dhamma Preeti, right? And I hope that this inspires you to do so as well as I speak through words of inspiration to you. So let us show our appreciation to Mrs. Ramani Yapa and Mr. Agra Yapa, who have sponsored today's Dhamma talk and created this opportunity for this discussion. And with all the merits that we accrue, may these merits be shared by all the attendants here, your friends and family, near and far, and all beings all across the world who are going through suffering and who feel a sense of entrapment in their lives. By the power of all these blessings, may they feel or may they gain strength of mind and body to escape through this feeling of entrapment and bring their minds into states that would allow them to truly contemplate on ways of reaching to stages of disillusionment and nirvana. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Now, does anyone have any questions that they would like to ask with what was taught? All right. If there are no questions, then Theron Sana, everyone. Have a lovely rest of the day.